Hi there, folks. It's Jay Frost speaking to you from Command Central at the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm so glad you are here, rejoining us after my brief interlude in England, and really happy that you chose to make this series a part of your life this week. Of course, we've got a great session ahead, and I'll be introducing our friend and guest in just a second. But before I do that, I want to thank you for making time to do this. And if you are interested in some of the stuff that I was doing the last several weeks before I got on that boat, you can check all that out at DonorSearch's website or on the DonorSearch YouTube channel. On the website, it's at DonorSearch.net. And of course, their YouTube channel is very easy to find. You'll see all those recordings, those discussions there, along with dozens and dozens of others. And if you're interested in learning more about DonorSearch, we probably won't be talking about them today unless our guest chooses to mention them for some reason. But it's not through any lack of affection. If it were not for them and the work they do in the field, we wouldn't have this platform to bring people like Shelly Watts to you. So I want to thank them personally for making the space to do this and have these great conversations this year and every year since 2016. And once again, you can see a lot of that content over there on the DonorSearch site. And if you haven't signed up for the list to receive announcements about future sessions, make sure you do that. You'll see a QR code at the end of the session today. Make sure you grab that and do fill out your survey as well, so we'll know what you want to see and hear in the months ahead. Now, I want to jump right in here and say that I'm going to disappear while Shelly shares, including a bit about her bio. But I will say this, I've had the pleasure of working with her in the past, not just in presenting here, but also in one of her former professional lives. She is somebody who's dedicated so much to this field and really has a lot to share in this area of joyfully soliciting major gifts, which I think, while it should be the thing that we all do joyfully, we don't. And so who better to talk about than somebody who brings joy to everything she does, Shelly Watts. Shelly?
Thanks, Jay. That was a lovely introduction, and I am so glad that we've worked together in the past. And I just want to kind of tee this conversation up so that everyone knows this is a conversation. This is not going to be me talking at you. I will do a lot of talking at you, but I want there to be questions in the chat box, which I won't be looking at, but Jay will relay to me. And also, if there's something you disagree with, push back. I want to get into those dialogues because I think it's healthy. We should, in the nonprofit space, be able to argue well and not just disagree, right? And so thank you for joining me today to talk not just about soliciting major gifts, but joyfully soliciting major gifts. And I'll get to a little bit more of that and why I put that in the title. I'm going to dive into the art and science of securing major gifts and making thoughtful solicitations. And so those who love elaborate, wordy PowerPoint presentations, be very prepared to be highly disappointed. There are no slides. So remember, see this is a conversation, and make sure you ask questions, push back, and even chat with your colleagues. This is a time for us to be collaborative and be thinking about how can major gifts be done better. All right, so generally most presenters start at the beginning, but I'm actually gonna start at the end. And so I'll get to that in a little bit as well. So a little bit about my background. I've been soliciting major gifts for the past decade, and I have been a certified fundraising executive since 2020. And so before I get started, I wanted to share the disclaimer that the views and opinions presented are my own and not necessarily those of any organizations or boards I may represent or serve. Okay, so asking for major gifts is not as complicated and stressful as people may make it seem, or it may seem. So if this is a daunting task for you, or you struggle to regularly ask for major gifts, this is going to be just a great session for you. And so you will learn very tactically how to ask and also continue to ask on a regular basis. And so, and just as a reminder, you learn from the very practice of asking and continue to learn by continuing to ask. So it can be joyful when you have a plan, when you stick to the plan, and also reduce barriers along the way. I will talk a lot about reducing barriers, which AKA means make your job easier. I don't know anyone that wants just a really difficult job. I make things easier on myself, so I'll share a little bit more about that today. So everything that I share today will distill down about a decade of major gift asking experience into an hour. It's going to go by really quick. And there may be times where you're like, can you just clarify or give me an example? I have many examples. So please feel free to ask Jay in the chat for an example, or hey, can you just give me, what does that actually look like in practice? Again, this will be very tactical. But caveat, this will not replace just going out there and asking, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes. That is how I've learned over the years. And it is proven to be very effective as a learning tool, because I can tell you things all day and every day, but you will not really internalize it until you actually start making those mistakes. So there's no magic bullet, there's no silver bullet. It's just experience. And those who invest in the stock market, the saying is, it's not timing the market, it's time in the market, right? So there's no secret magic bullet to doing solicitations and regularly asking for major gifts. It's just time doing it. And that's where the experience will prove to be really helpful. Okay. So the reason why I'm starting at the end of the solicitation process is that many fundraisers really struggle to get to the end, right? They may do every step before or even right before they ask and never actually get to the ask. And so I'm going to help you envision the end goal by working backwards, right? Because there's a lot, there's so many webinars about, all right, here's all the things you got to do. And then, okay, how do we actually get there and do it on a regular basis? And so I just wanted to let you know, I am a frontline fundraiser, and I am not a consultant. So I'm doing this day in and day out, living it day in and day out. And so I'm not just saying this as a face or someone that knows Jay to tell you what to do because I get paid to tell you what to do. No, I'm doing this on a regular basis. I am really living this out day in and day out. So I have solicited and secured about a dozen major gifts just recently in the last 4 months. So I'll explain some of those and what does that look like and what does that mean and the process in which I solicited those major gifts and secured them. Okay, so in my world, starting at the end looks like me getting off the phone. So visualize this, okay? Me getting off the phone with the donor after waiting a set amount of time after my in-person solicitation. So I'm going to say that again. Kind of the end, right? Obviously, there's stewardship of the gift, and I'm not necessarily going to go into that. But the end of the solicitation looks like me getting off the phone with the donor after waiting a set amount of time after my in-person solicitation. So that's really important. So don't lose that, in person. The donor is letting me know, and this is an actual real life example that happened recently. The donor is letting me know that they have agreed to make a gift at the amount I asked for. Let's just say for this example, $50,000, and for the specific project that I presented to them. So I hope you didn't miss that really important part when I said in-person solicitation. If you're taking notes, if you're just visualizing, just circle, highlight, underline, whatever you need to do to make sure that that's not something that's missed. I never ask for a gift unless it's in person. I never solicit over the phone or via email. I'm a major gifts officer. That's what I do, in-person solicitations. And the only exception is during COVID, when there were restrictions about meeting and safety, health concerns. And then the other exception is for international donors. And in that case, it's a little bit harder to have an in-person solicitation. I would make a solicitation via Zoom, okay? So you're thinking, great, an in-person solicitation makes sense. How do I make that happen? And we'll talk about that as we go backward in the timeline. But first, back to the gift. I got the gift. Yay. So how did that happen? We can rewind a little bit. I'm usually sitting across the table from donors, usually at their home, very rarely at a restaurant because there's a lot of commotion and timing things. The wait staff might come and ask for your order or your drink, whatever. if you are at a restaurant. So that is why I typically reserve the asks for the home, because you limit the amount of distractions. Remember, reducing barriers. And so here is how my ask may go. And so I confirm the amount of time that the donors have to chat. And why this is really important is because you might have gone into the meeting thinking, okay, I've got a full hour. Nope, they have an appointment and you're cut short 45 minutes, or it's only half an hour, or really they have all day, right? Those things are really important to realize when you go into that solicitation meeting, because then you're going to have to pivot on the fly. And so I ask and confirm the amount of time, mentally take that note in. And then I ask one or two open-ended questions to confirm that I have the right ask. And what does the right ask mean? The right amount and the right project. And so if I've gotten to this point of solicitation, I just might want to hone in a little bit just to just do a gut check that I have the right amount and I have the right project. Because there are times where I have made those switches right there in the meeting, or maybe while I'm driving to the meeting, as I'm kind of thinking over every single piece of information that is filtering through my mind about that donor or donors. Okay. And so I ask those open-ended questions, get that gut check, and then I pivot, right? And here I'll just give you an example. So I know you really care about students, and this is very generic. So this is not an actual, it's based on an ask, but so you really care about students. So then I would pivot. Well, that's why I am here today. I wanted to talk to you about this specific project that I think you would be really excited about, and explain the project in a few minutes. And I emphasize a few. When you're going in for an ask, please don't spend, 5 minutes I think is even long. Five maybe cap. I usually spend 2 or 3 on what the actual project is. And then I ask, and I'll tell you why. I'll ask, will you consider a gift of $50,000 to the X project? So I'll just say student project. And then let them think about it without interrupting, because the reason why I don't go into the project then, or spend a long, lengthy time to explain it, is because they're going to have their own questions and you want to get that feedback. So they will have questions prepared, right? They'll ask questions about the project, and that's great because you want to get that feedback loop. So, okay, tell me more about this part of the project. I'm not quite understanding that. Okay. How did you come up with that ask amount? I've been asked this quite a bit, so you can tell these are real life questions. What is the expected time frame of the gift? And you answer these questions the best you can, and then there may be times where you have to get back to them. So there's been times where someone will say, "Well, can you tell me?" And these our donors are super smart, right? They may come up with questions you didn't really even think about the project. And an example would be, for these types of questions, my answer to them, right, is, so how did you come up with the ask amount? I generally say, well, I am coming up with an ask amount based on how excited I think you would be about this project, or how much excitement you've shown about this particular category or bucket or pillar that we're working on. And so that is how we've put I've thought about it a lot. If you're in the faith-based sector, I've prayed about it a lot. And this is the ask that I came up with based on all of those things. So sometimes I'm actually answering those during the ask. And same thing with what's the expected time frame. If you're running a campaign, it might be, well, I'm hoping that the gift would come in within, let's say the campaign ends in 2027 and you want all the funds in to come in before that. Well, I'm hoping that this gift would come in before 2027, or something like, what's another example? It might be another example. Let me get, I just thought of one and it left me. Another example would be, okay, I'll go back to that. So you answer the questions the best you can, and then there may be times where you just have to get back to them. I've been asked questions, like random questions about projects, which I'm not going to know. I'm not the architect of that project, so I may not know everything, and that's okay. And this is where you'll follow up with them about that, the ask, okay? And so I usually close by thanking them for considering the gift and asking when I can circle back about their decision. And so some donors, right, depending on the ask amount and their capacity or what's going on in their lives, they may say a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And then I send a more detailed email afterwards, recapping the meeting, and may say, thank you so much for considering a $50,000 gift to the student project. I am so excited about this project because of this, and I know you are so passionate about this particular area, and I will send more details. So and this is just a preference, and so this may not be what you're comfortable with, right? There's a lot of fundraisers will have a case statement ready, a proposal ready, or a leave behind type of things, and those are fine. So if you feel that you need that as a safety mechanism, a blanket, kind of to just have something for them to leave behind, I typically utilize my words and storytelling about that project to inspire them about what they are potentially giving to, right? And so this is where I usually do the follow-up. If there's a question that they asked that I couldn't answer, or something just more detailed about the project that maybe they didn't ask about, I will send that after the recap meeting. Does the donor know that you're going to make an ask before agreeing to meet with you? Great question, and I will answer that. And so that is it, right? That's the ask. It's actually quite simple, but how to get to that point takes a lot of time, patience, and a lot of effort. And so, and before you even get to that question, I'm going to ask the more important question. Well, they're both important. How do I know that the donor is ready for an ask? And so it's just as important as whether the donor knows that they're going to be asked or not. Both of them are very, very important. So I'll answer that. When you get to the point where you can ask for a specific amount and project, that is the key. That is when you know the donor is ready for an ask. And the reason why I say that is, well, you have to get to know the donor first. You never set up an ask meeting until you can ask for a specific amount or a project, because that is the point where I have understood at the really at a basic level and at a fundamental level, what do they care about? I understand their philanthropy, their giving habits. So this is beyond just the basic and fundamentals, right? But I understand the whole person, and I think about, okay, what is their capacity? Do they have the ability to make this major gift that I'm asking for? And is this something that they're even interested in? And so I always ask for a specific amount, because you are giving your donor something to decide on. I never ask for a range or just for a general gift. Will you consider a gift? And I know that there's fundraisers that do this and that use these methods, but in my experience, it actually creates more barriers, because when you confidently ask for a specific amount and project, it shows you've done your homework, and you're not just asking anyone for a gift, right? Just the masses, right? The crowd, right? Like you would at a donor dinner or gala. But this ask is for this specific donor. It's personalized and individualized to them and no one else. And so when I'm doing these major gifts, asks, solicitations, I am typically asking for 10 times, 20 times, 50 times their annual gift, or for a capital campaign, a specific project. And so just to keep this in mind, these major gifts usually come with gift instructions, meaning restricted gifts. And the majority of major gifts come with donor instructions. That is just the nature of major gifts. It can be specific, like an endowment, a scholarship fund, a project or a campaign, or it can be less specific, but still comes with donor instructions, like we would like you to support this pillar, like land acquisition or something like that. And so these gifts that I'm generally asking for are pledged over 3 to 5 years. And so these are not annual fund type of gifts. I'm not typically asking for completely unrestricted gifts. And the reason being is that if you want a donor to give you their highest and best gift, it's going to be very, very closely aligned with their personalized philanthropic passion. And so if you're asking for an annual fund gift, most of those gifts are ones that are generally unrestricted. You're asking perhaps a percentage increase to their giving, maybe getting closer to their capacity, but you're not asking the 10 times, 50 times increase of their annual fund gift. That's just not, it's just very, very different. And so if people have questions about that, we can talk about that at the end. But also, this is, I think, really helpful, not just for major gift officers, but just nonprofit staff and executive members, is that there is a significant difference between receiving major gifts and having a major gifts program. And if you're not routinely asking for major gifts thoughtfully and on a regular basis, you may receive major gifts, but you do not have a major gifts program. And this distinction is actually very important. And so a good test is if you can, and this gets a little bit in the weeds, just follow me a little bit. A good test is if you can project revenue based on the asks of your major gift fundraisers, then you have a major gifts program. However, if whoever is making these projections, right, whether they're your fundraisers or staff members, if they're just projecting based on the previous giving history of donors, that is not a major gifts program. So if you run revenue projections based on upcoming asks of each fundraisers and the probabilities of each gift, that is a major gift program. So just keep that in mind. If people have a little bit more questions about that specific topic, we can also address that. And if someone has it in the chat, I'm happy to answer that as well. And the reason why that is very important, because the goal of a major gift fundraiser is not just to build relationships with people so that you receive major gifts. That is not a major gift officer. A major gift officer fundraiser is someone that routinely asks and secures major gifts, right? That is my job as a major gifts officer. I am routinely asking for gifts and securing major gifts on a timeline. And so the timeline is generally the donors, right? It's not like I want this major gift and I just ask. No, it's generally the donors, but I have that mapped out for the year. I know which donors are ready to make an ask, when I'm going to make the ask, and then which ones are not. And I need to spend more time cultivating them, helping to bring them into the organization a little bit, maybe introducing them to someone on the leadership team or a specific project that they're interested in. Okay, so again, we're going backwards, going back to the ask. If I'm ready with a specific amount and a specific gift, how do I get the meeting? And this is the question that I saw pop up. So I'm not seeing every question pop up, but hopefully you've spent time to get to know the donor, and hopefully the donor understands your role. And so this is something that I try to emphasize with people that I'm training or people that I do a lot of pro bono consulting. I love it. I love fundraising. This is what I think about all the time. And so if you want to chat with me afterwards, I'll leave my contact information, and I'm happy. My goal is to help the philanthropic sector be better at major gift asking. That's, I guess, one of my personal and career goals, I guess. And so feel free to reach out to me. I'll leave my contact information in the chat box. But so I am very clear about which meetings are get to know you meetings and which meetings are asking for your support meetings. So I'm going to say that again. I'll use air quotes. I am very clear about which meetings are get to know you meetings and which meetings are asking for your support meetings, right? Those things between these quotes are very, very important. I never confuse a donor, right? So I've heard some horror stories, as you do in our industry, where someone will say, I would love to take you out to dinner. And then it becomes an ask meeting, and the donor didn't sign up for that. And so that is not a good way to make an ask, because you have lost trust there and you did not make it clear. You did not give them the decision-making ability to say, no, I am not ready for an ask right now, or I don't want to be asked right now. You've given that decision-making ability completely, you've given that away, right? And so that's not what we should be about. So I am very, very transparent so that donors are never caught off guard. If it's a get to know you meeting, we can enjoy getting to know each other. And I say that. And here's an example. I want to treat you to coffee or lunch. I'm really excited to get to know you a little bit more and learn more about why you support the organization. So that would be an example, right? And so if it is a ask meeting and I have specifically said, and I'll kind of talk more about how I do this and how I approach the communications between myself and the donor. But if your ask is for a meeting that is a solicitation meeting, then I am very blunt about that. And this way they have mentally prepared ahead of time and have discussed their philanthropy with their spouse, their partner, or family, or whoever is making that decision, or whoever you are asking. This helps to reduce barriers. And I want to do this. I want to do as much as possible to reduce barriers, because back to the title, it allows for joyful major gift solicitations and not painful major gift solicitations. And so the other part of this is, does the donor understand your role? Okay. I have seen so many nonprofit staff members who perform these verbal gymnastics when they're asked about their roles. Well, I help the organization with this or that, or they're not transparent. Whenever someone asks me what my role is, and I get asked this a lot, I tell them, I'm a fundraiser. I've been doing this for about a decade and I love my job. Do you think any of my donors will then be surprised when I set up an ask meeting when it's time? Nope. Like I said, reduce barriers, increase joy. And so for those who do not want to be asked, and there's some donors who are like this, it doesn't matter how thoughtfully you try to approach them about an ask. They see the word fundraiser or they hear the word fundraiser and they will avoid me at all costs. And that's okay. Don't be afraid of this, because this actually helps me to qualify donors and disqualify donors based on their interest and desire to have a relationship with a major gifts officer, which that's what I am, right? I'm not going to hide my job or what I do. And so that's actually why, this side note, this is why I like to have philanthropy in my title or something like that, instead of nebulous titles where the donor's thinking, what does it mean? What is your role? And I've had titles like that. And so that's why the donors ask, what is your role? And I'm very transparent and honest with them. Okay, so back to the solicitation meeting. Just envision you're sitting across the donor, but then how do I set up a meeting if you've gotten those two criteria right and down, right? Specific amount and specific project. So how do you set up that meeting? So when I communicate, and this is just my personal preference, but it works. And I've seen some other colleagues struggle with this particular area. And so when I communicate with donors and I'm trying to set up a meeting or a call, and remember, I'm only soliciting in person, just putting that out there. My go-to method is always email first and then call, right? Just think about that process. Email first and then call. And I email not only the donor, but their spouse or partner to request that visit, and that I'd like to sit down with them and discuss their support around a project. And I let them know I'll be calling them in a week or so to follow up to see if we can schedule a visit. So email first, then call, right? This whole method removes several barriers because first, I've emailed both spouses or partners because I've gotten to know both spouses or partners. Please don't neglect that. It's really hard to solicit a gift if you do not have half of the decision making in the room. Try it. You're just like, well, there's always going to be lingering things in the back of your mind, like, how are they going to make that decision? And if you don't have half of that decision making, you're probably not going to make a very thoughtful ask. And so my goal is to always schedule a solicitation visit with both spouses / partners or family, depending on the ask, present. And this means that they have already discussed their philanthropy with each other. Remember, reducing barriers. Think about it. So if a fundraiser, just put yourself in these donor shoes. Think about it. If the fundraiser that you have a great relationship with, hopefully that's the case, emails you, right? Email and call, emails you and says, you have been such a generous and engaged supporter. I would like to talk to you and your partner or spouse about supporting a project or X project. You bet that they will have asked each other these type of questions, right? Reducing barriers. What do you think about this project? What do you think she'll ask us? How much do you think we can give? And so you are having the donor go through the mental exercise. And this is exactly what I want my donors to be thinking about before I even make an ask. I don't want them to be caught off guard ever. So I'm very explicit that I will be making an ask during a meeting and let them decide if they want to meet or not. That's okay. You don't ever want to bait and switch. I think in most things in life, you don't ever want to bait and switch anything. I can't think of a scenario where you'd want to do that. And so the responses range from great, if things have gone well during the cultivation process, looking forward to looking at schedules, right? Perfect response, super helpful. That is if you've done a good job of building a relationship with the donor. But there's times where you've done a good job and that's not the response you get, and that's okay. This response should be rare, but it might be, I do not have the extra funds right now. I've had that response, and that's a perfect response and super helpful. But it should be rare if you've done a good job of cultivating the donor and have done proper prospect research, right? The donor knows your role. They know that that this is going to be an ask meeting, so they may respond in this way, and that's great because you don't want to make an ask to someone that can't make the gift. That's not thoughtful. And so you should be able to answer the question, can the donors make a major gift right now? So based on your conversations with them, the things that they've told you, they're paying for an expensive wedding or the business is currently struggling. Maybe it's not the best time. It seems very obvious, but there's times where we forget to treat the donor as a whole person. And think about it yourself. Are there times in your life where you have been more willing or able to make a large gift than others? Of course. Is there giving tied to the stock market? You should probably know that. One question I may ask is, have you been following the market these days? It gives you an indication of whether their wealth is tied up, how their wealth is tied up, and how they may likely make a gift if you do secure a gift. And so remember, major gifts are typically not always cash gifts. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And so I know we're getting a little bit close to time, but Jay, do you have any questions or just an aggregate of any questions that keep popping up that I may be able to explain and I can keep going?
There are so many, Shelly. So, and some just taking a, kind of a variation and asking, especially about virtual versus in person. So people have remarked on that. So I don't know if you'd like me to share some of that with you now, or if you'd like to continue and then we give it, 15 minutes of that. What's your preference?
Sure. Why don't we I like that question, virtual versus in person. Can you give a little bit of context behind that question?
There have been a number of people who have talked about that. Some who say, for example, that they're having a meeting with a donor and they haven't said whether or not this is a solicitation. And you were very clear on that. But they say they're having a meeting with the donor and they want to know how you would treat a virtual meeting differently from the way you might treat an in-person meeting.
Oh, that's a really great question. I honestly, it would be very similar, right? There's some nuances, and I'll get to a little bit of that in later in the presentation. But thanks for bringing that up. I honestly, there's not a whole lot different. Obviously, you're not in person. You can't shake their hand. You can't have, because that's part of it, is like building that rapport, building that trust. But I'll talk a little bit about that after a couple of sections. So I think that's okay. That's really helpful to know. Okay, and then so I was thinking that people were not wanting to do the in-person meeting versus, and so I'll get into that. Okay, so back to scheduling the meeting, and I'm just going to emphasize this again. During the call, right? So you've emailed them, I'd like to set up a meeting to ask you for a gift. I'm going to call you next Friday or next Monday. Make sure you call the next Friday or next Monday. Don't be a person of your word. And so donors will have questions about the solicitation process during that call, and that's okay. So why in person? And the goal is to put them at ease and let them know that, and this is probably, maybe we'll answer some of the questions, that the most caring and thoughtful way to ask for a gift is in person. Because I've been doing this for a while, sometimes I'll say, I'm a little old school, and I find that this is the best way to ask for a gift. And trust me, I have had donors insist on not wasting my time or not spending the money to travel, or that it could be done over an email or phone call. However, this is just a best practice note, right? Donors give their best gifts when they're thoughtfully asked in person, right? This is just not like a blanket email. This is not a phone call. You're just campaigning and calling people up. No, this has been proven time and time again. And I'm always ready for this response when I have donors who tell me afterwards that that they're just trying to find, it's not an excuse, and sometimes they're nervous, and that's okay. Your goal is to try to put them at ease. Who wouldn't be nervous before an ask meeting or to be asked in person? That's nerve-wracking. Think about it from the donor's perspective. But when I overcome this objection using some of the things I've just said, I've had so many donors who tell me afterwards, oh, I'm so glad we met. You were right to insist on an in-person meeting. And so I can share some stories at the end, but they're like, oh, it makes sense. Okay, yeah, oh, of course it makes sense. When they've gone through it, it's not that scary. You didn't catch them off guard. You prepared them for the meeting. They actually find it enjoyable, right? It's still nerve-wracking. There's still nerves, but it's enjoyable for them because you've done a good job. And I've had donors email me afterwards to say, you're just doing a great job. I'm so glad that we had this meeting and that it wasn't via Zoom or via a phone call. And so let that just sink in a little bit. And you have to sometimes overcome objections because the donors don't know what they don't know. And so this is how to get the solicitation visit. But how do you get the cultivation visits? I think most people have a good idea, because you need the intel of what amount of what project. And so this just happens with spending time with your donors during cultivation visits and phone calls. So do not underestimate the relationships that you can build via phone calls. Okay. I do 95% of the relationship building with donor visits and phone calls. I only release the emphasis, or in my mind, the calculation of the effort that is put in for cultivation is for email is only about 5%, right? I'm doing a lot of email and sharing updates and telling stories about impact, but that's not where I see the most time spent building relationships. And so during these interactions, I typically ask open-ended questions, rather on the phone. Why did you start giving to X nonprofit? In person? What other nonprofits do you support? Why do you give to these types of organizations? My main goal also during these cultivation meetings is to ask if I can set up an ask meeting in the future. Okay, I'll give you an example, and hopefully we have time to talk about it. But here's an example. I spend a lot of my time asking these open-ended questions, and then I might ask a question like, I know my program's trying to get out. It seems like you have a passion for supporting students. We're working on a campaign for this specific project focused on students. When things are further along, would you be interested in learning more and having a future conversation about supporting it, right? You're getting permission to ask them at a later date. Okay, so this is where the international and Zoom meetings go. So quick side note, for international or Zoom meetings, this is just my personal opinion. Please do not blur your background or add a fake background, my opinion. But fundraising is so sacred, and we spend so much time asking our donors to share their personal details about their lives. Please is appropriately, right? Share a part of yours, even if it's like my little pet, right? Scampering in the background, making noise, or showing books that you love, or hobbies. Like I play softball, you see a softball bag, or paintings that you love. And so don't be afraid to appropriately show them a little piece of your life, because you're asking very intrusive, very personal questions sometimes to get to the bottom of, okay, how do I make an appropriate ask? And so just don't feel like you have to be this very, so extremely professional button up where you can't show any part of your own life. That feels disingenuous from a relationship standpoint. Okay, so let's see how to figure out which project to ask the donor to support. Remember, cultivation meetings is to understand the whole person. And some of this will be asking thoughtful questions. Some of it will be done through research, whether publicly available research, through wealth screening platforms like DonorSearch. I love DonorSearch, okay? And no one's paying me to say that I've used DonorSearch. If you do not have a wealth screening tool, you are at a disadvantage. And so DonorSearch, I feel it is one of the best wealth screening tools out there. And so we can always talk about that later. And then also your own CRM. Don't neglect how much information is in your own CRM. Don't notes that were left by other fundraisers, or giving patterns, histories. So ask about their family, their work, their background, philanthropic goals. And sorry if I talk really fast, I'm trying to get to the questions. But how they make their decisions or giving motivations. Look at your CRM and make sure that you have that information. And then how do you get to the ask amount? Remember, the largest gifts that donors typically ever make to an organization are typically 5% of their net worth, so over 5 years. Does that mean don't ask for those gifts now? No. These asks are reserved for donors that have built you have built a solid relationship with that donor through the organization. The organization has built a solid relationship over many years, they have connected with leadership at the highest levels of the organization, and all of these, you have a project or proposal based on their top philanthropic priorities. Okay, so again, major gifts are typically, and this is very generalized, 10 to 20 times their annual amount. You can hone in on an ask amount based on quantitative information, right? Past giving, income, net worth, and then qualitative data that you receive. Let's say they talk about vacation homes or regular international travel. And so, and also take and consider how they make their gifts. Is it through a family foundation, securities, IRA, donor advice fund, any of those things? Those should go into your feedback loop of what type of gift, how much am I asking for, and what project it's for, okay? And so I know that I'm going to just recap really quickly, and I'm going to talk really, really fast. And so I know we work backwards, but let's just start again from the beginning. So some people, their minds don't work backwards. So let's go from front to back. So how do you get a cultivation meeting? Best time to reach out to a donor is via phone and email to thank them right after a gift. Not rocket science. Start a book conversation. If you have a great conversation, mention that you'd like to meet them over coffee in the future, or when you're in that part of town or state, if you're a regional fundraiser. Treat them to coffee or lunch. Remember, this is a get to know you meeting and not an ask meeting. Make sure that that's clear. Ask great open-ended questions and take down good mental notes. Always write your notes down after phone calls and meetings. Put them in your CRM. To reduce your own barriers to remembering. I don't remember some things right after the meeting, right? So put them down immediately. Talk about your donor when it makes sense, but not the whole entire conversation, okay? This is not, you are a representative of the organization, but these are people. That's not the only thing they're thinking about. Oh, you love traveling and exploring the world, right? You find pivot points, natural pivot points. Oh, did you know about our international work? So my goal as a fundraiser is to learn more about them. And if you just talk about your organization, I guarantee you'll never learn about what they're most interested in supporting. And you might ask something like, hey, I've just talked about these 3 projects. Which one is most interesting to you? oh, you're interested in supporting students. One of the campaigns I'm working on is focusing on students. Would you be interested in a future conversation about supporting the project? Or, oh, and these are real life examples. Oh, you've mentioned that you've supported a capital campaign recently. Are you open to, I'm this bold, are you open to future conversations around our capital campaign? That's not a bad question. They might say, and I've had donors say, yeah, I'd love to talk about it in the future. And then that's how you can get to what to ask for and then how much. Okay, so I think I've covered most of the things. So reach out via email that you'd like to visit and chat about their support. Make sure it's clear that it's a solicitation meeting, and then call them to follow up, right? Email, then call. And some people may do it the opposite way, but I just feel this disarms everything before you get to that point in talking with them. And so be prepared for questions or objections. And then when you're at the solicitation meeting, check the time, ask open-ended questions. Don't spend a bazillion minutes focused on the project. Spend a couple so that they have their questions asked and on the table. And then make an ask for a specific amount for a specific project. Wait for the response. And then ask when you can circle back for a decision. Okay. That was a lot, Jay. I think
that was a lot, but it was great and a great synthesis. And there were a couple of things I'm not sure if you hit on them or not, so I'm just going to try to bring them back. One question was about individual versus corporate and foundation. You focus really on individuals here. Would you just make a statement, or however you feel, and think about whether or not this process is really tailored for the individual?
It is very tailored to the individual, right? I have done both. I've worked with individuals, corporations, foundations, and they're whole different, I don't want to call them monsters, but they kind of are. It's very different. You treat them as an individual, but it's almost like corporations and foundations are living organisms in a different way because they have many more layers and many more decision makers. And so it's almost like working with a family that they don't always agree on everything and they may have different competing priorities. And so maybe that's a follow-up webinar at a different point, and corporations and foundations and how they're different. But this definitely is very specific to individuals. There's things that can be applied to that and even to executives and owners of businesses, right? So that becomes a little bit nuanced too. And so you just ask these questions. If you have a business owner, how do you make your decisions around philanthropy? Is it based on the business priority? Is it your own priority? So if you don't know, just ask questions. And even with foundations, what's your timeline around grants, right? So just ask a lot of questions because you're going to get a lot of detail. But if you just talk at people, you'll never get the questions answered that you have that will help inform your decision making and in your next steps.
Right. Another one that came up somewhere in there was about designated versus undesignated. So you've largely talked about listening, this active listening, finding out what they're engaged with, and then saying, would you be interested in that? I love those examples. They're so clear. For those who say, well, yeah, but the organization has needs. What do we do? Can't we just ask for these open gifts? What is your response to that?
Great. But it's not about your organization. It is, right, because you're a representative of an organization that you're fundraising for, but the donor has needs too. You're trying to make those things. And so if it's breaking up your budget, and it may not be super restricted down to this chair in this classroom, right? It doesn't have to be that, but you are honing in on a gift that is thoughtful and in alignment with the donor. So maybe it's, and this is where a lot of nonprofits struggle, because if you are not asking for these specific gifts, right? Because you're going to be able to ask for a much larger gifts. If you ask for general gifts, you're going to be asking for much smaller gifts. And so just think about it from a financial standpoint. Yes, you're going to spend this amount of money on this topic or pillar anyways. Wouldn't you want to have a larger gift in this area and have to backfill less unrestricted funding? And I know that is really challenging, and we probably won't get to that, but it's really challenging for most nonprofits. But if you are in the operations side of fundraising and you are not helping your frontline fundraisers by giving specific pillars or buckets, right? That's very general, or specific things that they can give to. And if you're afraid of you're just gonna be overrun with these restrictions, it's generally not the case. It's not a realized fear. And so there's some thoughtful organizations that will do something like this is I know one organization that they don't allow for restricted gifts under $100,000, right? That might not work for you, but that might be a good balance to be like you can still ask for a restricted gift, but it's the larger gifts, right? Because if you're asking for restricted gifts and it's $5,000, it can be challenging to make sure that those monies are spent appropriately.
I know that we have other questions here, and I know that there are lots of things people can ask you. Some are tactical, some are broad. So first of all, I want to thank everybody in the audience for offering those. I will take the liberty of getting those to Shelly. I don't know what she might do with them, but I want to make sure she has seen them to honor your time. And Shelly, I want to thank you so much for offering such a great review of this, and then synthesizing it and summarizing it as well, so people can really have an approach that they can apply in their own organizations. How can people be in touch with you if they want to learn? Oh, it's right here. So I see that's to the host and panelists. So Jack will put Shelly's email address in the chat. You'll see that in a moment. And I'll take the liberty of reading it. I know we may have people who are visually impaired here, and that is Shelly Watts, CFRE. That's SHELLY WATTS CFRE at gmail.com. You have a lot of history here, but as you said at the outset, you're speaking for yourself. You're not speaking for all the various organizations you've worked with and work with currently, which is why we're not featuring that part here. But I guarantee you, if you have a chance to talk with her, she will be as generous with you as she's been with us today. So thank you very much, Shelly. Really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And you can probably tell I love this. This is what I'm working in and day out. And so feel free to reach out to me, and don't feel I've been doing this for a while, and you just learn through mistakes. I've made all of the mistakes in the book. Okay. Every single one. And so that didn't go quite well. How should I have done that differently? Right. And that's really just do it. And I just tell people who are new to major gifts, go make a lot of mistakes, right? Reason, right? You want to use your brain and you want to be thoughtful, but think about how would you like to be asked, right? And how would you like to be approached? But again, you are not your donor, and so don't get always too in your head that donors don't want to be asked. Do you know how many times that I have heard, "I could never do your job, but thank you for asking. I really appreciate the thoughtful way that you have asked." And that brings you as a fundraiser a lot of joy. It's fun to do this job. It's great when you can ask and do it thoughtfully, and donors really appreciate what you are bringing into this profession. So don't be afraid that you just think these donors are curmudgeonly and they just don't want to be asked. They actually really appreciate, because they know they want to change the world, and that you're a mechanism to be able to do that. They're looking to change the world in ways that can be done through your organization. So just as the last note, joyful major gift solicitation is definitely a possibility. So if it's not joyful, you might be doing it wrong. So reconsider the way that you're doing it.
Thank you so much, Shelly. And thank you, everybody here. Our thanks, of course, to our sponsor, DonorSearch. And one last note, you'll see a little thing about podcasts. Jack put that in the chat. If you have a podcast or you listen to podcasts, and chances are, if you're with a nonprofit, your nonprofit has one. In fact, we ran into someone whose organization has 22 podcasts recently in DC. Then you might be interested in the session we have coming up this Thursday. It's Podcast-thon. And if you haven't heard about that, you're not alone. But over 100 podcasts are getting together to support charity. You'll learn all about it this Thursday at 1 o'clock. So I hope you'll join us for that, and maybe bring your colleagues who are involved in the podcast within your organizations or world to it with you. We have a lot coming up in the weeks ahead. You can learn all about that at DonorSearch.net, and you can see a recording of this session and refresh your memory on everything that Shelly shared. That'll be coming to you both through the DonorSearch site and the YouTube channel, but also in an email, which you will receive in the next 48 hours with a link. So check that out. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves out there. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, Shelly.